All right, so we are at the final installation of the Every Fighting Game Type Explained series, and we have a few things to talk about here. Namely, arena fighters
Yeah.
is a big topic, and there are a lot of games in that field, and there are games that have huge followings,
Mm,
right? Typically, the anime games like Naruto and
usually.
Dragon Ball and all those games, and I guess it's interesting because the arena fighter is it's about perspective, but then also the freedom of movement
Yeah.
in a big way. I think the first time that I played something that could be kind of classified as arena fighter-ish is probably Pit Fighter. Do you
Pit
remember that game?
Fighter. Is then like the graphics were like the similar to Mortal Kombat, wasn't
Yeah, it
it?
had digitized graphics, so it had like
Oh,
photos of people
yeah.
as like each of their frames of animation,
Right.
and it's a funny game because it's actually a co-op game. Right, so
Sure.
it's kind of a beat 'em up, but the reason why it was kind of a fighting game
Mm.
was because there was like a bonus mode. So
Mm-hmm.
after a few stages, you would actually have to fight each other.
Oh, so it
Yeah.
doesn't start off as a fighting style, like against each other. It's more to do with you beating the computer enemy.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Ah.
You've worked to defeat multiple computer opponents,
Oh,
and
okay.
you move in that kind of final fight, wrestling game,
Right.
eight-way movement kind
Mm.
of control scheme.
Mm, mm, mm.
So it was, I guess, that is kind of the idea of the arena fighter. It kind of comes from that wrestling game, eight-way
Okay.
movement background.
This was
And
an arcade game or a console
it
game?
was an arcade game.
Arcade
Yeah,
game.
I remember playing
Mm.
that, and it was it's a pretty violent game. I think there was like blood and like you can throw like boxes on people and
Maybe that was the time and era where like Mortal Kombat, I believe, kind of started the fame of digitized graphics, right? Like clips
yeah. Well,
of
Mortal Kombat's the one where
photos.
yeah,
Mm.
everyone started doing that. They started
Even
doing
the
that for
Street Fighter, the movie, the game.
yeah, Street Fighter the movie, the
The
game,
game,
which is
yeah.
that's an entire topic. Actually, somebody at Combo Breaker told me
Ah,
I know, Gerald, you get a lot of requests for analysis videos, but I think it'd be really funny if you did a Street Fighter, the movie, the game video. So
right.
we definitely need to do that. Maybe we
Yeah.
can watch it and riff on the
Maybe
movie
it'll
or
be
something.
interesting if there's actually like a Discord group, small group of people who play that competitively. That'll be awesome. I know some people delve in the game a little bit to try out combos and stuff, and there's
Yeah.
been combo videos like Desk, for example. He made some cool combo videos of that game.
Yes,
But I'm
yes.
curious whether they have a circuit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
For
don't
a very
know.
niche game.
I guess I wouldn't be surprised, but it's definitely something that would be at the Discord game level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your fight cates or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the first game I talk about in the Every
Mm.
Fighting Game Type Explained video is Dark Edge, and this is
Yes.
a game that I didn't know about, and I think I remember when I showed it to you, you hadn't heard of it. I showed it to Justin, and he hadn't heard of it. This
Mm.
was something that a lot of people didn't know about. And I guess it makes sense because it wasn't a popular game at
Sadly,
the time.
no.
I didn't see it at
Mm.
the arcades, and I only really I don't know exactly how I ran across it, but just looking at the game, you could tell it was kind of like they were trying to do the 2D archetypal Street Fighter kind of game, but
Yep.
with a different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and they used the sprite animations to try to simulate like a 3D environment.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it's hilarious. Like I showed the video, like you can do like half circle downward inputs to do certain attacks because you're like in the background.
That's right.
So you have to do like the motions depending on where you are on the 360-degree plane. And you're mentioning was it Gold Lewis inputs?
Yeah, because it does remind me of Gold Lewis, the character in Guilty Gear Strive, right? He has a very unique ability where his half circle motion special attacks doesn't necessarily have to be traditionally from like back to forward direction, right? It could be from forward to back, going up or down, or
Yeah.
even sideways, like down to up or up to down. That's the kind of concept that we see on Dark Edge as well. There's no longer hold back to block. You sometimes have to hold up to block in that game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So
So
it's a funny perspective in that where the cameraman stays on the one side of the arena and doesn't really move with the characters, right?
Yeah, so hold up to block was a weird thing. I remember when we were like messing around in the game and we're like, wait a minute, so how do you block when you're over there? Is it up to block? And we did it and it
Yeah.
worked and we're like, what? Like you can hold up to block?
I
That's
remember one of the characters had like the Blanca ball kind of move.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm like, okay, so now you have to charge from down to up to do a Blanca ball towards the opponent that's on the
Forward,
top
yeah.
of the screen.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
even up to down if they're at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I thought this was a really good game to kind of start that section off with because it is kind of an arena idea. But the thing about arena fighters is that during the evolution of the arena fighter, they went through a lot of like Street Fighter inspired elements, like holding back to block.
Yep.
That they were like, okay, maybe we'll try hold up to block, and there's a lot of experimental things. And throughout the progression of fighting games, all these companies, they tried to make this kind of a different perspective of the archetypal 2D fighting game. And it was very experimental for a lot of these games. And of course, the arena fighting game now is more fleshed out and there's more kind of like established gameplay types
3D
now.
engine and everything.
Yeah, but Regressives of Dark Combat is
that was one of
that's a really funny game because it's like you have the final fight movement.
That's right.
But then like when before the round starts, you can see that they show that the movement is like that final fight movement where
they
you have the
drift
8-way.
Around
They drift around in a circle, the stage. It's like, hey, just letting you know that your characters can move around like this. I know it kind of looks like a 2D archetypal fighter, but and one of the first times that I kind of experienced that kind of gameplay was when I played Final Fight in co-op mode where you can actually punch your friend. So I play with a friend and it gets to the point sometimes you're playing these co-op games where there's friendly fire and your friend like accidentally hits you and then you just in the spur of the moment you're just like no, I'm gonna hit you back. It's like you don't hit me.
Some people might remember that those kind of games had mode A and mode B.
So
mode A was the one where you cannot friendly fire.
That's right.
Mode B was the one where you could. Now, if you're an arcade owner and if you're a smart business person, you put all your games to mode B so that they would use the money more.
Yes.
Yeah. Accidental hits not only caused fights among the players, it brought more business to the arcade owner.
That's right. Yeah, there are bound to be accidental friendly fire moments, and even better for the arcade owner if it's like me and my friend where we just started wailing at each other. At one point, we're like killing each other.
And the arcade owner's like, yes, put more money in the machine, yes.
But I had so much fun with that that I was like, this is like, oh, we just turned this into a fighting game. Like it's not co-op anymore. It's like the heroes are like they kill each other, and like the bad guys at the end of the game is just laughing. It's like those guys can't even cooperate together, and so that was kind of maybe that was like what inspired Aggressives of Dark Combat. I don't know what inspired them to make that game.
Possibly,
I know they were doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I remember like wanting to play the game properly when I was younger. I had to be so careful pressing the invincible move.
Oh,
because it has such a big hitbox.
Yeah, it hits everything, left and right.
I didn't want to hit my friend with it, so I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna press this, but it's my friend nearby, and I'm scared to do the move. And if I'm too scared, I'm already dead by the computer opponents. So it's so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, we're such degenerate co-op play.
But back in the day, like including Aggressives of Dark Combat, there would have been many similar archetype of games that allowed you to go against your friends rather than computer opponents, namely the wrestling style games.
Yeah, that's right. So the wrestling style games are kind of interesting because when we were kind of categorizing all these types of games, we kind of planted the flag of Street Fighter 2 World Warrior as the archetype, the iPhone of fighting games that just kind of started this revolution in the 90s. And what's interesting is that it was the 2D archetypal setting. It wasn't the 8-way pit fighter, final fight kind of setup or wrestling game setup. It was the Street Fighter one. And I guess if Street Fighter 2 was like a wrestling game, but it was extremely successful, then we would say like, oh, the predecessors were these games instead of Karate Champ and ER Kung Fu, right? So it's just that these wrestling games never exploded the arcade scene like Street Fighter 2 did. So in a certain sense, these wrestling games are kind of the actual OG, like old school fighting game archetype in a way,
Right.
but it just didn't have that success. We talked about, I think, in the first installment of this podcast about how popularity is an important thing for
Yes.
things to catch on, right? Just because you have this innovative thing that does have a following and people make other versions of it doesn't mean as much if it doesn't have the popularity required to create a new standard. So yeah, the wrestling games, I played a few wrestling games. Remember it was WWF at the time before they turned it into WWE. I remember playing, I forget what game it was. It was on the Super Nintendo, but there's one where you can tag in and out. And I remember
One that I remember is, once again, similar style to Mortal Kombat or Pit Fighter.
Oh yeah.
And it was developed by Midway also. Midway at the time made the WWF fighting game.
I think I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
So you had Undertaker and
I remember Undertaker. Yes, I remember this game.
These popular wrestling superstars doing special moves.
Yes. No, I remember
so they
this
had
game.
Fireballs and stuff.
Yeah.
It was a pretty cool game. And then when I was in the arcades, I also was a big fan of Slam Masters. Capcom designed the game. And then funny thing about that game is that when the game intro plays, there's this character that looks like a main character in the game, but never appears in the game. So I'm like, why does this character even exist, right? But apparently that character still exists in the game's lore. So I'm like, okay, like whoever designed this is pretty philosophical, I guess.
Yeah.
Another unique thing about that game is initially the first game was like a wrestling game, and you could play simultaneously of 4 players, like 2v2 in the wrestling ring, right? And you could tag in and out, but the other mode allowed 4 players to play simultaneously.
Yeah.
When the sequel dropped the next year, it shifted the game's direction to a traditional fighting game, just 2D plane.
Yeah.
Another big change other than the style of the game is, in the first iteration, the attack buttons were just 1 button for attack, 1 button for jump, and a 3rd button for pinning the opponent to get the 3 count and the win.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. When on the sequel, other than the fact it's a 2D fighting game, now it's like light punch, light kick. And
so they changed
heavy
the button
punch,
scheme.
heavy kick. Yeah.
Okay, so like the first iteration of the game was just like a straight up wrestling game with a pinning button.
Yeah.
And by the second installment, they were basically let's just make it like a 2D hold back to block archetypal
same characters, same intellectual property, same developers, but a lot of influence perhaps from their Street Fighter franchise where they wanted to maybe experiment going to a 2D style of the game, I suppose. And that was a pretty interesting take on where it's the same series, but the genre shifts.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to how much people loved the 2D hold back to block archetypal fighting games at the time, right? To the point where you make a game series and then you just completely change the gameplay style on the second version. It's just these were the kinds of games that there were so many of during that time, and I think it's just it just shows that the wrestling games are kind of overshadowed during that time.
And the popularity does matter, right? A little bit off topic, but it featured Haga as a playable character. Haga from Final Fight.
Nice.
So that's understandable, right?
Yeah.
It's from Capcom.
Well, it's Capcom.
So they have all the rights to use that.
He's in Marvel, you know.
But that was kind of the start to show Capcom maybe wanted to do their universe.
Oh, Capcom's universe. Yeah.
So, wow, Haga's in this game. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then later on, eventually, Haga becomes like a fighting game character in Marvel.
Yeah.
Also a Capcom game. And other games have done that too, where, Yoshimitsu from Tekken, he's a Soul Calibur character too.
Oh, yeah.
So fighting games also kind of went through where they thought the franchise universe adds towards the popularity of the game.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and the thing is, like you said, it goes through multiple different, fighting game archetypes as well. So you'll have like your favorite characters doing, in completely different systems, and then they have to create a new way of fighting. And I guess one of the big examples, like I guess it's not a fighting game, but having Tifa and Cloud in Air Guys, right? So they're it's like, how do you take these characters from this other franchise and then make them into fighting game characters? And I guess that's what they're doing with 2XKO as well, trying to bring somebody from MOBA into a 2D tag fighter.
Yeah, because Air Guys maybe at the end of production, this is just my assumption. They're like, this is a cool concept, but maybe it's not gonna be so popular. Let's add some popular characters in the mix.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
then
it's that game is wow. Well, like when we were kind of messing around in that game, I was the whole blocking system and the fact that
it
they
was
have like highs,
so
lows, and mids. It was like this
complex.
is like a big brain game, and it just like the way this is another example of it's not like it's definitely more refined and I would say a better game than Dark Edge, but it does have those elements of the archetypal games that they're trying to cram into an arena perspective. And I think that's where some of the game systems were not very intuitive. And if you go to like Combo Breaker, there are people who love that game and they
Oh
got
yeah,
really good at that game. And it's definitely like it's a cool game in its own way, right?
yes,
But it's definitely its own thing. It's not
for sure.
like anything else, and I don't think there will be anything like Air Guys. I think it's
Yeah.
just Air Guys is going to be a unique game from here on out.
Definitely. It's like and Air Guys and Final Fantasy both originally made from Square, and they also made a fighting game called Tobal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Square also experimented in the fighting game a little bit like that. And a small shout outs to Air Guys having the influence of international level of things. Ryan Hart, I
Yeah.
believe in one of the interviews I saw, Ryan Hart moved to Japan because he was so good at the game.
Really?
Yeah, at Air Guys.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I think that was one of the motivations to have him become who he is now, like a strong fighting game player.
Okay, yeah, because like I know Reinhardt is a multi-fighting game specialist. He's one of the few that can do super good in Street Fighter and Tekken.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't surprise me that he would, be good at a game that's completely different.
Out of all, like, if people say, "Oh, I moved to Japan to like train up Street Fighter," that's plausible enough. But
Yeah.
Reinhardt was unique in that sense. When I first heard about this,
Yeah.
like Air Guys was a big part of his fighting game journey.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because, like, I mean, that in a lot of ways, that game is like one of the more complex fighting games that you can have, and it still has the high, low, mid, scheme of the 3D games.
The mind games still exist.
Yeah, the mind games still exist, but then it's like kind of like almost like Zelda 3D Zelda controls, right? Like you're like kind of playing Ocarina of Time
It's a
and
mix of action games a little bit. Yeah, I think so.
yeah.
And speaking of wrestling games too, there's also this little factor about where do you draw the line in the simulation and like a casual and arcade style of games, because wrestling is technically, it's an entertainment form of sports in
Yes.
real life. I mean, yeah, and back in the day, I think it's more to do with the technological advancement where it's not as like super high tech as now. Therefore, it made more sense to be in a fun arcade game. But with the advancement of like console games and graphic engines and whatnot, some of the recent WWE games actually feature like really high quality graphics with actual licensing of the superstars.
Yeah.
And they kind of get released like your popular sports games like once every year. I believe from 2K Games. And it's like a very fine line between the simulation and an arcade style game.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you make because when I played the Super Nintendo versions of these wrestling games back in the day, it was kind of simulation like in that there wasn't like fantastical moves you can do. There wasn't like E Honda headbutt
flying
around, and it was like what you would see in like a wrestling match. So it was like a pro wrestling simulator in a way. But then, like you said, there's that Midway game where they like added special moves and they tried to make it a little more. It's like an arcade game, so they tried to, have a more like showy stuff in the game. But yeah, I think that's the line between simulation and fighting game. That's something that I guess we can talk about when we get to the
because I just wanted to mention, right? I genuinely liked and ended up loving fighting games because I was a fan of martial arts movies. And I think WWE has a big part in that, where it's like they kind of blur the line between reality and fantastical moves, right?
Yeah.
So I see a lot of fighting game community members who are also big fans of wrestling, and I think it's a common ground that we share.
Oh yeah, there's like I think there's a tweet that I saw recently where people are like, there's two types of fighting FGC people, and it was like you're either like in the anime camp or the pro wrestling camp, and I'm like, oh okay,
that's true to some
there's
extent.
definitely a big group of FGC people who are in one or
Definitely.
the other, sometimes both.
Yeah. And speaking of FGC people, I also wanted to make a mention of For Honor.
Yes.
Yeah.
For Honor is something, I made a little mention of it in the original cut of the video, but yeah, it wasn't like very in depth or anything. But this is a very interesting game that I think deserves a little bit of time talking about.
Yeah. The reason I mentioned and transitioned from the FGC people is that one of the veteran FGC member, a very top competitor in the Street Fighter 4 series, Ed Ma, had taken part in the combat design.
Yes.
heard.
Ed Ma is also a multi-fighting game player. He's an OG. You can find him in these old VHS tapes of him playing like Marvel and all these games. So he's somebody who's kind of taken his fighting game knowledge and brought it into development.
If I were to give a short introduction, for those who may not be familiar with him, he has had, in terms of competition results, third in Evo. Yeah.
Okay.
For Street Fighter 4.
Nice.
Guess who the top 2 was?
Wait, what year was that?
2009.
2009. That was Justin Wong and Daigo, right?
Yeah, Ed Ma
2009.
was third.
He was number 3.
That's
okay.
how good he was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And for this part as well, I just want to travel back in time. We have a clip of Ed Ma playing against Daigo.
Really?
We can just watch this a little bit and kind of see if the 2009 meta is any similar to the current meta.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
You really prepared this. All right. Awesome.
Shout outs to Ed Ma, by the way. He's a good friend of ours. We see him every Evo.
Yeah. No, he's
him.
he's always in the Hawaii Salty Suite, and we always talk about game design.
Yes.
So it's great. But yeah, here's the
So
the
this
clip.
is the winners finals of Evo 2009.
Okay.
Ed Ma versus Daigo.
Yeah, this is a long time ago.
This is a relic.
2009. This
Yeah.
is a relic now. Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? We, or most people in the fighting games community, may have heard about Daigo versus Justin Wong
Yeah.
in 2009 Evo.
Yeah.
Not many people have heard about, in comparison, about Ed Ma. But I think it's important to highlight people like Ed Ma.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, this is actually fascinating to me because it's like it's like the Daigo Perry moment where you don't nobody saw the grand finals. They saw the Perry moment.
Yes.
In that match, but
So Ed Ma, popularly known as the Akuma player,
yeah.
and Daigo, of course, the Ryu. See, that thing is so broken. He could air fireball on the downwards arc of the jump,
Yeah.
so he can delay the landing.
Yeah.
You can nowadays, if you do that, you just land right away.
Yeah.
So that was a really strong thing about Akuma back in the day. Sadly, Akuma back in the day and now, known as the glass cannon,
Yes.
very low health, right?
Yeah.
Low forwards. We have focus attacks.
Yeah. Boy, Edma already life deficit huge.
Yeah. Cannot afford to make any mistakes.
Yeah.
With a low health character, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I think most people's understandings were, you're gonna die quick anyway. May
Yeah.
as well attack like a maniac.
Now this is really interesting to watch because this is an Akuma that isn't like crazy with like Vortex setups. The Vortex setup Akuma didn't come until later in Street Fighter 4's life, it seems.
Yeah. This is the first year of Street Fighter 4.
Yeah, people aren't exactly
So-
sure. Like they're kind of playing this more like older Street Fighter games in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
So still, a lot of things have been undiscovered, very raw.
Yeah.
This is the era before setups. This
Yeah.
is more about your pure reactions, your instincts,
Yeah.
and your past experiences as a fighting game player.
Yeah, there wasn't as much tech that was discovered. I'm sure option selects were still kind of just being developed at the time.
Yeah, and I don't think option selects were even common. Like, I believe there was an era where option select existed, but people hit the tech from each other.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was save it for the Nationals era,
So I'll
right?
fast forward to the last bit.
Okay.
And
Oh,
for those who are listening or watching, yeah, Ed Ma has done really well in other fighting games too. So definitely check it out.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Wow, he's
Look at that. See how
okay,
broken that
yeah,
is?
yeah. DP.
Low
Yep.
arc EX fireball.
Oh,
of course he wakes up
the cancel.
DPs.
Yeah, this is so Street Fighter 4 really broke the rules of the wake up DP. Oh, okay.
Solar plexus, run away. Oh, the anti-air sweep.
Yeah, he just caught him throwing fireballs in the air. That's that's a blast from the past. That's it's a very different kind of Street Fighter.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of Street Fighter 4 as well.
Even for Street Fighter 4.
Yeah, because remember that was the first Evo that had Street Fighter 4, and there were so many years afterwards, and now you're kind of seeing like a different point in the game's life. And I think this is with like any game that's been played for a very long time. The meta will change, but then patches and updates will change. And so if you look at like obviously if you look at Street Fighter 2, like just Street Fighter 2 Turbo,
Right.
and you see Tomo Ihira playing that versus like ST, it's a completely different game.
Yeah. Even Tomo Ira does mention he did cross-ups before cross-ups were a thing.
Yeah.
And he just understood it as just jumping in really deep.
Yeah,
right?
which is like
that's all he needed to know.
Yeah.
And then eventually just became the cross-up that we know today.
Yeah, it became a huge part of fighting games, and
Sure. And
but
just I wanted to show that clip real quick to give you guys a sense of how involved Ed Ma was both in the competition environment as well as his take and understanding of how important like the understanding of fighting games work mechanically, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and him being involved in combat design of For Honor, and then eventually, or fast forward to the present, he is also involved in 2XKO alongside some of the other fighting game veterans too. So my question is, knowing that these fighting games and other games that will potentially release in the future can involve some of our friends in the tournaments and big names that we know that we watch from the streams involved in game design or the artwork maybe, or even the community management side of things. Would this be an assurance that our games will be good? Or would there be any concerns that these people are more working towards the development side of things rather than being a competitor?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. If these like top players like that are part of the community, if they can be good for the development of a game, and I think there's different schools of thought with this. I think if you're trying to make a completely new kind of innovative game that hasn't really been tried before, something like ARMS, for example, I think a game like that would require a lot of people from kind of outside of your typical fighting game community, or just outside of gaming communities even. I think I remember a quote in an interview with I believe it was Shigeru Miyamoto, who's a very, very famous person from Nintendo, who basically was saying that that he looked for people who were kind of outside of this gaming world.
That's
to
reasonable.
To have input on how to make a game, because they're the ones that have a fresh mind and a fresh perspective of how they can make a novel thing for people to enjoy. But I feel that when it comes to, if you're going to make like an archetypal game, if you're going to make something that comes from the tradition of the Street Fighters and the Tekkens or whatever, or even like platform games, if you're coming from a tradition of Smash, then you want somebody that can understand that kind of stuff. For example, like Rivals 2, or Rivals of A, even if you go to the first one, that game is definitely made by people who understood Smash on a competitive level.
At least have played for a bit.
Yeah, and you
Good
can't,
or not, just experienced enough to know.
Yeah, but you can't make a game like that if you don't, understand what ledge guarding is. If you don't understand these kind of concepts, you can't really have the right kind of conversations to develop that kind of stuff. So, in the case of in the type of game that's being made in 2XKO, that game is very much like we talked about it in our video. it's kind of in between anime and versus type
Mm-hmm.
games. And it makes sense that you would have people like Apology Man
Oh
and
yeah,
Clockwork
Nerd
and
Josh.
yeah, Nerd Josh
Yeah,
and
these people have been around in our FGCs, and they played many games, participated in tournaments, and did really well in them too.
yeah,
Clockwork being legend in Marvel 2 and 3, Apology Man in Guilty Gear and Marvel,
of course, yeah.
Nerd Josh in most like old school games like CVS 2, Alpha 2, and Street Fighter EX and all sorts. These guys kind of know their ins and outs.
Yeah.
And back to my original question of whether would this be of any concern and why would people think this is a concern at all is because there was a time where Harada was interviewed where they tried to invite some pro players in Tekken and try to see if they can have some inputs in balancing the game. And then he
Yeah.
said it turned out to be very boring.
Yeah, that's right. So this was kind of from a pro player's perspective. And I think what that indicates is that just because you are good at these games doesn't mean that you're going to make some kind of gameplay that is enjoyable for the people that you're showing the game to, right?
That's right.
It's not a guarantee. What it can mean though is that you understand how these games work and how people play them, right? And I think that interview was also talking about how these pro players wanted to make the game as balanced as possible. So this
Right.
was more of a balance issue. Now you can have people in the in fighting game development that may have the opposite opinion that we shouldn't be overly focused on balancing things because once we do that, we can kill a lot of the fun aspect. And so it's like, I think if you are a game designer, that is different from being like a fighting game person. But then being a fighting game person kind of does influence the way you want to design the games. But I feel that there's everyone's kind of different in how they will approach that, right? Because if you
Right.
think about it, think about how different people's opinions are in the FGC in the first place. Like there are people who are like, we've got to like balance every single thing. It's like that move is overpowered. That move needs to be, improved. This and that, like every little tiny thing. And there's some people who are just like, I don't know, let's just play.
Yeah.
Like who cares? Let's just play. And they're all good players,
Right.
right? But it's so everyone does have a different philosophy. So I think it's definitely more of it depends on who is making the game and who and what their philosophy is with the game. That said, when you are playing fighting games all your life and you go into the development phase, you are going to have some ideas and thoughts that you feel like things should just be a certain way. But I feel like a good game developer can ask the right questions to the right audiences. And it seems like, a lot of these companies will reach out to the community and talk to people, have different perspectives and see what ideas they have too. Yeah. And so there's kind of a collaborative effort I think that goes into making these games. And I think at least among FGC or fighting game people, a conversation can be had that's at least on the same page or the same language.
Oh yeah, for
so
sure.
People can understand is like, okay, well, if we're going to have, if we're going to make this kind of game, should we have a third dimension or should we keep it 2D? Should we make it like a 5D game or should we stick to like the hold back to block 2D? Like that's a type of language. And if you have people that are developing the game that can talk about that, then you can come to some kind of consensus. Whereas if you're just coming from absolute scratch, then it's going to be, I mean, there's going to have to be a very strong visionary to make that game, right?
Like, it's ultimately like you want a mix of everything, well balanced, within not just the game itself in terms of balance, but in the development side of things as well. And the perspective goes, if you look at it at a broader spectrum, it's like you got to have the good mix of the game being good and game being fun. And as well as if you look at it in a like a corporate company's point of view, it's got to also perform well enough to be sold, so that kind of pseudo guarantees their activities for the future, for like a potential sequel or something like that, right?
Yes.
And in small relation to what you said about how pro players and experienced players, feeling mandatory that they are part of the development process as well. I had a little bit of a chat with one of the local game reviewing platforms of IGN Korea. The editor of IGN Korea mentioned something interesting where they once did try inviting top fighting game players to review a unannounced game at the time. It would have been maybe one of the recent Tekkens or Street Fighters maybe. But there was an issue where just having a good player to review the game was a terrible idea because being good at the game doesn't mean they're really good at their writing or speech skills.
Oh,
So
yeah.
some of the feedback that he got from the pro players is like, oh yeah, this game seems fun. And that was all there was to say.
Yeah, no, I mean that's where like there's different kinds of fields involved, right? This is a typical classic example of like a lot of technical people, like engineers, that have to write about their field and their research and their studies and their findings. It's really heavy with technical jargon, and it's not the best writing.
Yeah.
And of course, like people who are coming from the writing field, they look at that and they're like, "What is this like
What
mess?
is option select?
Yeah. What is this
Yeah.
like? No one understands this. Like, are you writing to communicate, or are you just writing to like show off your knowledge? It's like so yeah, I can definitely see like being good at a game doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be good at other fields, right? It's like, I mean, this is the whole thing where it's like. Einstein is a smart guy, but can he make a good pancake?
Sure.
Right? Who knows? Maybe not. Like, I don't know if I can make a good pancake.
Yeah.
But they're just completely different
Because
things.
we see things like, we see cooking shows on TV or social media. That doesn't mean if we see it once, we immediately like the best chefs in town or anything like that, right?
Yeah, well, it's just a different field. I mean, I'm sure like if I spent the next 5 years just trying to make the best pancake, maybe I could. But I mean, it doesn't. It's just people do different things,
Sure.
right? So,
and like I get a small tangent off of this is that being in the content creation field, I think it's also sort of important, or I want to hope that other content creators have a little bit of space in their, say, preparation, that their content could sometimes be used as a reference material for these people. If you're a fighting game content creator, if you make something that's something important or valuable that maybe other players or industry people should share in your content, that is, it could potentially be a reference material to educate those people that you just mentioned who may not be in the games field, but they're really good at punctuation or their writing skills, can kind of learn from these contents that's made in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess that's the communication thing, right?
Sure.
So I guess a lot of the people that are watching our content is interested because there's kind of it's the audience that is speaking to. So every fighting game type explained kind of speaks to an audience that's zoomed out a little further than the typical FGC
just the
crowd.
fighting games crowd.
Yeah. So there's a lot of analogies to different things like rock music in this recent video, but then I talk about chess in other videos. A lot of people understand the concept of chess, and they've all seen Queen's Gambit. And there's a lot of ways to communicate this kind of stuff. But I think once you're able to do that, for me, it's always been if you can show people these things from your community, these concepts, and get more people to understand it, then the conversations about that topic will be better all around by everybody.
And even just a general social skill, like even in, like you said, if you go to like, say, an industry meetup and you see all these people in the same field that you work in, but seeing them for the first time, a good way to open up a conversation is make like real life analogies, right? Making examples, like, when we talk about fighting games, we can talk about like, say, TV shows or sports or other games that can kind of relate to, and that's part of the communication process, right? So so communication and being good at fighting games and developing fighting games, those are all different things. And just because you're good at one doesn't mean that you're good at the other, but then you could also be good at all three. So it's like whatever. At the same time, don't be discouraged that you're nerding out at one specific things. As these communication skills exist, so that therefore you could meet the right people who can, create the full circle.
Yeah,
so it's
for
always
sure. Everyone kind of
positive
feeds
thing.
into each other.
Definitely,
they're all tag tagging in for each other
Yes.
all the time. Yeah.
And in the spirit of arena games, usually, like you said, it's like a lot of anime games that fits into the arena titles. Were there any moment in your life that you played a video game that's not fighting games, but felt like you're playing a fighting game eventually?
Yeah, I guess the biggest one for me was Bust a Groove,
Bust a
which is
Groove,
so Bust a Groove.
yes.
Not so in Japan the game was called Bust a Move, but Bust a Move is a game in the U.S. that is called Puzzle
Puzzle
Bobble in
Bobble,
Japan,
yes.
right? So there's like this
Naming
puzzle game,
mix-ups.
naming mix-ups. But I'll just say Bust a Groove because everyone will know what that game is if I say it like that. There was a sequel, but basically it's this dance fighting game, which is
Okay.
it's like a rhythm fighting game. And rhythm, Parappa the Rappa was a very famous PlayStation rhythm game, and there were like these rhythm games at the time. I think people are still making them. Of course, there's like Beat Mania, and this game was interesting because there was a 1v1 mode, and basically your character, you would choose a character, and they would have certain dance moves. You just press certain button combinations during between each beat.
Yep.
And then you have to time it to the beat. And if you can do that, you'll dance successfully. But they had one mechanic where you can throw garbage or attack your opponent.
Oh.
And you could attack your opponent, and if your opponent saw that coming, if they were able to put the right input by the next beat, then they would dodge it. So it wasn't that was pretty much the only mechanic that you had to like mess up the other person.
The rhythm game aspect was the combo of that game, right?
Well, yeah, it was kind of you can kind of see it as a combo. So there was like, you had to time throughout the whole match. You were timing these things, right? And I remember they made a sequel to that game, and I bought the Japanese version.
Okay.
I had the US version and the Japanese version because the music was different. Because they had was it Japanese lyrics for the Japanese version and English lyrics for the.
Do they have like licensed music as well, like for different regions?
No, they
Is that
just
the
made
reason
it for the
why?
game. They just made it, and so like they
okay.
just thought like, okay, we can't, if we were selling this to like the U.S. market,
The
we can't
Western
have
audience, right?
suddenly all the songs are in Japanese and they can't understand, right? So they use the same music, but they just got a different singer, and so it was really interesting to have kind of both. And I actually prefer the Japanese song recordings better. But I mean,
That's
they're
the same
both good
preference
games.
for me for anime.
Yeah,
I prefer the Japanese dub.
Yeah, but that's okay.
Yes.
But no, I understand that. But it was definitely a fighting game on a very, very deep primal level
So
because
it's
you're
a
like playing
digital
people.
dance off.
Yeah,
pretty
it's a
much.
dance off, and
And
so
if you drop a beat, you're dropping your combo.
yeah, basically, and you're doing a combo the whole time. And so they actually had this game in the arcade as well. When I was in Korea one year, I went to the arcade, and this game was
coin-op?
Yeah, there was a coin-op version, and it was like weird.
I think I remember.
Yeah, they had like these big, like those like dome buttons,
Right,
or,
right,
those I don't know, like
Like
the
the,
Bishibashi
Bishibashi
buttons.
machines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But they had like those buttons, but like you could actually play that game in the arcade, and there was like it was like a fighting game that you had like people side by side that were playing, and I remember there was like lines, people watching.
Damn.
And I
okay.
remember like I played this person, and we both got a perfect score on. We just got a perfect on our rhythm aspect, and we attacked each other, and we just dodged all of our attacks. So we just dodged each other, and we got a perfect score, and it was a tie at the end.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, this is kind of, that's not good design then, right? If it's like, if it's too easy to defend. And
Right.
so the game, in terms of like a 1v1 fighting game, I don't think it was completely fleshed out like as this super competitive game.
Because I think the point of the game wasn't to beat the opponent. It was rather to test your rhythm abilities, I suppose.
Well, yeah, it was kind of, that was more the focus. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, we both got perfect scores, so we should high five each other. But then that's not the fighting game spirit, right? The fighting game spirit is like, I
beat the other guy
beat
no
the other
matter
person.
what.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crush your opponent, right? It's like, oh, we have ties. We're all so good at this game. We're all getting
We both
ties.
win.
We everybody wins. It's like that took it away a little bit. So I've always had an idea of like, I kind of, if I ever were to ever make an indie game or game development, I want to go more in like a fighting game rhythm kind of game, but like really put more fighting game
Right.
elements in there. So I'm definitely inspired by Busted Groove and
That's
you know those
awesome.
games. So it's
By the way, don't get any hopes up if you're a fighting game developer and listening to this. Please do not add things like double wins. There's a reason why double KOs exist so that can both lose.
yeah, double KOs both losing
Yeah.
now, right? Yeah,
They nobody gets around.
yeah. Oh wait,
In
actually, it
the
depends on which game you're playing.
Yeah,
though.
but I think the modern fighting games, if you double KO in the ranked match, they both the scores cut down for both players.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
nobody
Wow.
wins.
Yeah.
And even in the CPT rules, if they get a double KO and it's the deciding match,
Yeah.
that whoever's gonna win off of that, they have to rematch the game.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I kind of like that. Yeah.
Fighting games are becoming soft, guys. If think of a way
I'm part of the problem.
Think of a way to double KO both participants so that they both go to the losers bracket. Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
that's too harsh, but yeah.
Yeah, well, but yeah,
well-
there's fighting there's games that have a fighting gaminess
Yeah.
that aren't classically considered fighting games.
Yeah.
And I think you have a game that you're pretty good at that's like this, right? You were
So
actually
for
like
me, if I were to be asked the same question, my first ever time that I thought this was a fighting game was a game called Heavy Smash. So Heavy Smash is a mixture of European handball and fighting. So
Okay.
European handball is, if you've seen the Olympics, right? They can run with the ball and then they have to throw the ball towards where the goal is and there's a goalkeeper.
yeah.
But this game was like that, but you could like tackle or shoot lasers against each other to steal the balls.
Oh.
So Heavy Smash wasn't really a popular game,
Yeah.
but if you guys know what I'm talking about, do look it up. It's a pretty cool game by Data East.
Okay.
Yeah, so I play that
Interesting.
sometimes whenever I want to warm up as well.
Okay.
But I do have a showcase material where in my local venue back in Australia, we had a Puzzle Fighter tournament because Puzzle Fighter came out as a collection in one of the past Capcom games.
Yeah, that's right.
And we thought it'd be cool to have a tournament and see how the hype goes.
Yeah. Now, so this is very interesting, right? Because like there is a lot of hype, and I think one of the games that I kind of got into as a spectator was Puyo Puyo Tetris, where seeing high level play in that game, like DDR Dan and like there are a few other players that were just so good at the Tetris portion that I was just like, oh, I have to. Well, everyone knows Tetris, right? And you see someone like being godlike in Tetris in that game. It's fun to watch, and because I got into that, I started getting into the Puyo Puyo aspect, right? And that game is kind of sold as like, if you go into the tutorial mode, they talk about like, oh, this is what in the West they play Tetris, and in the East there's Puyo Puyo, and so now we're combining these, and in a sense, it kind of worked because like you kind of have to play those two games, and they go back and forth, and it's actually kind of in a certain sense, it's a complicated mechanic because you're learning two big games.
That's like their own Street Fighter Cross Tekken kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, to their communities. Yeah.
And and you also pick characters, right? This is kind of an interesting thing about these puzzle games. But I guess the thing that's really missing from these kind of puzzle games, as hype as they are, is that you don't have the character aspect, right? So a big part of fighting games is you want to be like Magneto. You want to be Chun-Li.
That sense, I can tell you, Puzzle Fighter, the characters do matter because they have different garbage patterns.
Oh, they have different patterns. Okay.
So there is actually a tier list in Puzzle Fighter. You know how the garbages fall?
Yeah.
The color pattern is unique to each character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the more complicated they are, technically they're the higher tier. In Puzzle Fighter, if I remember correctly, again, it was Akuma.
Yeah, okay.
He had the diagonal pattern of the colors. So once the colors turn into a breakable block, it's very difficult to blow them up compared to the horizontal or the vertical ones. So there was a tier list in that sense for Puzzle Fighter.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think puzzle games do that. They'll have like the characters kind of have different abilities and skills. But I guess the problem is that it doesn't. It's just the the characters don't have to be that character, right? They can just
Definitely.
like there's no like grappler and like a small character that affects the hitboxes and hurt boxes. Like in a game that's in a puzzle game, you can just have stick figures for everyone. You know, if Puzzle Fighter didn't have the Street Fighter IP, you could have had any IP and had pretty much the same game, right? So it's I guess that's the thing with puzzle games, and even Puyo Puyo Tetris has a bunch of characters, and you can unlock them.
Sure.
And so
were they cosmetic or were they? Did they affect
I forget.
the game?
I was never good. I was a spectator, so I wasn't like. I had some friends who were pretty good at the game, but as far as I know, it was more of a cosmetic thing.
The visual aspect didn't matter as much as your traditional fighting game goes.
Yeah. So yeah, I do think these kind of games that have the fighting gaminess are definitely something that you could have in a fighting game tournament. And if you go to some tournaments, you'll see these games being played like all over the place. People will have either their own setups or they might have a side tournament. But these games are out there. Catherine is a big one that was very hot at one point.
It was an Evo too at one point.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people were getting into that game, and there is that fighting gaminess aspect. But yeah, I guess this kind of goes into what what a fighting game is. In the hybrid category is it's one where it's taking elements from other games, right?
That's
and then
right.
one of the big points, this is actually kind of a something that I'm a bit proud of for finding is the fact that the simulator is kind of a genre which can be hybridized with other game genres, right?
Yeah.
So like a fighting game simulator is definitely not even close to what Street Fighter 2 World Warriors like.
No magic.
Yeah, and so
no flying around.
and that's one of the characteristics of like the archetypal 2D fighting game. There's so much flying around and magic. I mean, even if you look at Mortal Kombat with like the digital sprites, you have like Kano doing like a Blanca ball and stuff like that, right? So one of the aspects of the archetypal game, the original 2D archetype, was that it was an arcade style instead of a simulator style. Right. So if you look at like, I don't know, the opposite of simulator is, for me, I can kind of, I don't know, I think of like arcade style.
Arcade is about right. Or a casual game.
Yeah.
Where
or a party game.
It doesn't have to make sense.
Yeah.
Right?
It doesn't have to make sense. So I know there are simulator games in the arcades, but those are like racing games. And that's why I wanted to make that point. The whole point is that, and this was kind of an issue where I'm like, where does Bushido Blade go? Where does Hellish Court? Remember that game that's just kind of inspired by Bushido Blade? And like, there's this type of game, but they're very focused on the realism aspect. Yeah. So I think that if those games, if the simulator fighting game was the hot thing in the 90s and it wasn't Street Fighter 2, it was like, or maybe if the game instead was a very realistic game and that became the game. Yeah. That everybody was trying to copy and make clones of.
You made a really good point as well in the video where if you're good at the Gran Turismo game, there's a potential you can become a really good driver or a racer.
Yes.
Compared to Mario Kart, right?
Well,
and that I also brought up a curiosity from there is that even within simulators, there's a bit of a distance in the gaps where, like you mentioned, the Gran Turismo games, if you have the racing wheel controller, it will get you as close to as if you're really driving a vehicle. But then in a UFC simulator, no matter how good you are in a UFC simulator, it doesn't get any close to you being a good martial artist.
Yeah, I mean that's where like the
that's
racing
very sophisticated, but
that's where the racing game gets really. I mean, like the example that I made is they made like a documentary about this guy who actually became a real race car driver from
Gran Turismo.
From Gran Turismo, right? So that's a very extreme example. But like if you look at like UFC games and stuff like that, the realism that they have, the thing that makes those games kind of more simulator like is like things like the doctor stoppage mechanic,
that's right?
Like. That is realistic. If you beat somebody, like I've seen some of the level 3 supers in Street Fighter 6, like, after some of those level 3 supers, like Luke's, like there needs to be a doctor that comes out.
Yeah.
Like that's
if you get hit by Zangief's final atomic buster.
Yeah. There's no doctor because there's like now there's a funeral after that, right? Yeah. So now you have to get like
if you want to be realistic about it,
you have to bring out the Undertaker and like he needs to do the whole ritual, right? Because that would kill you. But so that's the thing about like fighting game simulators because there's no like you can't strap yourself into like a bunch of like power gloves and like
Right.
have this thing where you're like virtually fighting somebody.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that there can't be a very more realism focused gameplay where you die if you get stabbed in the face, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah. So even within simulation games and how they kind of showcase the realism does come. You receive the same experience that you are definitely playing a video game rather than you trying to become or professional or have expertise in that field or anything like that. It's still a video game, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and one of the highlights I want to mention in those fields where those games that doesn't necessarily have to be fighting games, but can be played in a fighting game style environment was celebrated in Combo Breaker, or used to be Ultimate Fighting Game Tournament when they
Oh yeah.
ran the Mystery Tournament.
Yes.
It used to be Mystery Tournament because it was bunch of not as popular fighting games played in every round of the bracket. Later on, they didn't really discriminate. It didn't even have to be a fighting game as long as it had the principle of 1v1 and zero sum.
Yes.
They were all
I
accepted.
do think there's another element
Mm,
that I didn't mention about what makes something a fighting game is, or have that fighting gaminess is. I mentioned 1v1 zero sum game,
yes.
but then also I feel like there needs to be kind of like a time limit where it's a very quick game,
Mhm.
because if it takes like an hour to do a match here, I don't think it would have been appropriate for a fighting game tournament.
That's right.
I think it needs to have like kind of relatively quick pacing.
Because, I mean, fighting games by average, it always have like either like a 60-second or a 99-second
Exactly.
timer rule.
It's an arcade kind of format, right? So I think that's what separates fighting games from chess in a lot of ways, right? Obviously, there's bigger reasons than that, but like chess would take way too long to do a first to two. Or
And the hype doesn't show up until the very last stalemate turn, right? That's when the hype begins. But fighting games and just like Beyblade, it's hype from the get-go.
Yeah. It's very, very quick. Like you can do now in Street Fighter 6, you can do a huge combo at the very beginning. You could do a meter dump at the very beginning of the round.
EX moves from the start of the round.
Yeah. So it's kind of there's definitely an arcade spirit to that. I think that's the only way I can explain this.
Another not fighting game to begin with, but has fighting gaminess and mentioned in your video as Pong.
Yeah, Pong.
That is Windjammers.
Yeah, Windjammers is definitely has a fighting game aspect to it for sure.
So in Southeast Asia Major in Singapore, still running strongly to this day. They recently had the Capcom Pro Tour event alongside Gamescom Asia by the guys Youngdae and the crew. In 2017, there was a Windjammers championship.
Yeah, this was like a newer version of the game. The one I grew up with was the SNK, like Neo Geo, like in the arcades where you can choose which Neo Geo game to play. Like I remember that was how I played Windjammers, but there is a newer version. I think I've been seeing it at recent tournaments.
Yeah, so it was to celebrate the newer version.
Yeah.
But the tournament was done on the original Windjammers.
Oh, okay.
And the reason being, France actually has a competitive Windjammers scene.
Really? They're good at Windjammers.
And the best player in the world is a French player, which I'm about to show you now.
What?
Yes.
High level Windjammers?
Super high level Windjammers. Guess who is a commentator?
Wait, you're commentating for this? You commentated for Windjammers? Are you a Windjammers person? What the heck? They're just lobbing at each other.
Commentated by yours truly and Youngdae.
What?
So K-kun is the best player in France.
Yeah.
Pyrotech is the second best player in France.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is the winner's final of that tournament.
Wow.
This was played at the big stage in front of all the Game Start Asia crowd.
Yeah, this is really interesting because like I've never played a match like this. This is high level.
Mm-hmm. It requires reactions like fighting games.
Yeah.
It requires precision like fighting games.
Oh.
And it's very, very fast-paced.
Yeah.
And there's so many strategies, so many different characters with different special moves. So yeah, it's a fighting game Pong, really.
Yeah, there's definitely like there's like a sports element to it as well. I mean, it's a fictional sport. There's no such thing as windjammers in real life.
Right.
So it has to be a video game. That's why there's the Pong reference. But in windjammers, there's so much importance placed on
Of course.
positioning and spacing and timing, and it has so many of the fighting game elements that
Similarities, right?
there's no question that that's a kind of a fighting game. But then it's also kind of a sports game too. But I guess the fact that it's fictional sport, it makes it kind of go more towards the fighting game
It's
direction.
like acceptable in the video game realm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time to wrap it up. So we are actually starting the podcast series with the every fighting game type explained video, and this is the final episode of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was a big video, and hopefully, I mean, I don't think, I don't think we should make videos that long anymore.
I guess
It's,
the reason why we are now trying to be more active is so that we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could have split up the video and released it in parts, but personally, I thought this video just needed to be one whole thing,
Right.
just one stop to go, and I just wanted it to be continuous. I didn't want it to be like something where people would have to take, watch one video and then just go do something else.
Yeah.
I mean, they can pause it or whatever, but I feel like the way it's meant to be seen is just one full product, so that, and everything kind of ties into each other, right? And so basically, this was kind of like, in a way, the way that you can look at it is it's a game about 2XKO where I put a bunch of other stuff about fighting games before it. A lot of people, there were some people that thought that it was very 2XKO heavy at the end, but I mean, this was basically like explaining the history of like all these fighting game types was a way to show what kind of game 2XKO was. So that's why at the very beginning that there's this kind of, the very beginning talks about somebody who said, "Oh, 2XKO, this is Tekken-like,"
It was
right?
our goal at proving that it is not Tekken-like.
Yeah. And so it was, but then like it goes through all the aspects of 2XKO so that you can understand it, and yeah, I mean, this is one of those. This is the part of the video where it just kind of summarizes every single thing that I talked about, or not almost every single thing, and it kind of combines it into one game, and you can see where the history of 2D archetypal games kind of spilled into 2XKO. And of course, Riot was super helpful with that. It was one of those things where I wanted to do a video because on this game, and but then there was an excuse to make to explain every single fighting game on top of it. And of course, I've been following. If anyone who's seen the first analysis video, I've been following the Rising Thunder team.
Oh yeah,
and I'm just super interested in what they have to make, because they have they have an innovative vision for the way fighting games will go, but they keep with the roots of what we grew up with in terms of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken, like all these things. They still have that that in their mind, and they're making a game at a giant scale. They're using League of Legends IP for the game, and it's going to be free to play.
Opportunity, right?
Yeah, it's a cool thing that's happening, and I know that there's like a lot of people who think that there's so much hype that maybe what if we get disappointed, or that this is the FGC's last chance, or some kind of like really, I don't know, in my opinion, kind of extreme thoughts about the game. But for me, I'm just like, oh, this is a game that these people are making, and I'm really interested in what they have to show for. And I mean, like the Canons, they developed GGPO.
Yep.
They've solved a lot of fighting game problems, and it's just interesting from so many different levels. And so this is a game. I mean, you played during the beta and at the events, and this is definitely a game that we're all super interested in.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's a mixture of a lot of things, but I think the more the weight goes to the fact that it is being developed and cared by and for the players that we are friends with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's the biggest part in why I am a fan in that
Yeah,
aspect.
because we know that they're people that really care about fighting games
Mm.
and want to make something good. So there's that aspect. But we also played it. I
Mm.
mean, we know that there's when you look at some of the details in the game, you can definitely tell it's been
Yeah,
made with
it has a trail of like the history of other fighting games and the homage that it has um, that makes sense in 2XKO.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and yeah, just generally they've also been really helpful. When I was working on this video, they set up the interview with Tom Cannon
Mm.
for me. They knew that I had an interest in this game, and Riot basically extended their hand, was like, we're going to help you with whatever content you want to make about this game,
Yeah,
because obviously it's in their best interest too.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, it was basically, yeah, I was interested in this and they're going to help me. And trust me, like I've been doing a lot of fighting game stuff, and I'll just say, like, most companies don't do that. They don't, like, if even if I'm super interested in your game,
Yeah,
like most companies don't really I want to do this content, or you need game codes because you're doing an event, and it's like,
right.
it's just the
The
support
gesture.
the
Yeah.
support is different with each company.
Yep.
Obviously, some are more than others, but the way that Riot handled it was that they were just like, okay, we're going to help you make the thing that
Mm.
you want. And they would basically, I was able to, it was cool. Being at the booths at 2XKO,
Yeah.
like you can play the game, and they basically, if you're like a content creator, they will record the game for you on their laptop. They have a
Right.
recording set up there for
That's
you.
right.
And so you
Yes.
can get that footage and put it into
All you
your
needed to do
content.
is press record, and then they would save it in either a USB or an SD card and just give it to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so obviously, if they can help me, then I can put that kind of stuff into my content, right?
Yeah.
So
It's
it's
courtesy for
yeah,
everybody.
and
So,
and of course, it's something that like I want to do, so everyone wins,
yeah.
right? So that's kind of how
Playing their respective parts.
yeah, I think it's a win for everyone.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
um,
So that was pretty awesome. And yeah, even getting to do this with you, myself, having a bit of chat about the work we've done was a great experience. And hopefully, for Core Gaming podcast in general, we hope to bring more interesting contents.
yeah, the next one's going to be more psychology based. I know some people are big fans of the psychology Core gaming videos, and some people like the mechanical aspects of fighting games. This one's going to be more psychology based. I think it'll be really interesting. I think people will find very fascinating. So, yeah,
Awesome. All right.
awesome. Peace.